Welcome to my video on making stick baits. One of my viewers had asked if I would do a series on making stick baits, and I've made all of these stick baits here, and I thought maybe I should talk a little bit about things to consider when you're making stick baits. But here's a stick bait that I made a few years back. It's 80 grams. And it's not a floater, it's a medium sinker. Of course, this is one of the decisions you have to make when you're starting making stick baits, is what do you want? It's helpful to have a target species in mind. For example, wahoo don't strike surface lures very often. I've never seen one. I've had a wahoo strike one of my lures that was close to the boat near the surface, but generally speaking, they don't hit lures and jump out of the water and do that sort of thing. So they tend to be a deeper fish. So this lure, this stick bait, is 105 grams. It's heavy, and it's meant to cast from a boat, and you let it sink, and then you reel as fast as your arms can go to get those wahoo to come after it. So this, for me, is a fabulous wahoo lure. I'm looking forward to it catching a nice big fat wahoo. This is just another style, another color, got a slightly different head. This one's 100 grams. Again, this is a lure that will sink relatively quickly. One of the problems you have to I don't live near salt water, so I don't get a chance to try my lures out in salt water every time. So if I target a medium sinker, I have to somehow account for that 20% difference in density between fresh water and salt water. So, a hook will ride higher in the water in salt water. So that's one of the challenges I have as well. So these two I made a while back. These are fairly large. This one is 157 grams, and this one is 155 grams. Different colorations, different fins. These ones are quite broad across the shoulder. And I would probably if I was going to make more of these, I would probably make them a little narrower. They're a bit blockish in the shoulders, although I've had some, quote, experienced fishermen just rave over them because they were big and healthy. Now, let's talk size. This guy is 6 inches, and I'm talking from the nose to the tail, not counting any stainless steel. This one is 6 1/4. This one is 6 3/4, and these larger ones are 8 1/2, both 8 1/2. So I was trying to think what I should do for this video. So I thought what I would do is I would make a couple of lures, probably even 3 or 4 lures about this size. I like this shape, and I'm going to make these in several different flavors. One of them will be floating, but floating doesn't mean that there's no lead in it. One of the issues so these are all casting lures, just to go back a second. And when you get up to a casting lure about 157 grams, that's getting pretty darn close to the maximum that you can cast. I would say 250 would be absolute maximum. They're just so heavy. They're very difficult to cast. So these guys at 105 grams or 100 grams are ideal size. This one at 80 is very easy to cast. So I'm going to make a couple more of these. I'll probably make a total of 4 or 5, and you might see different versions of the lure coming in through the videos depending on where I am with all these. It's often better for me to make a batch of lures because I get better at them as I make more of them. So making a one of is perhaps more difficult. For example, when I'm putting 3 coats of oil-based paint on them, Am I going to do 3 coats on one lure or maybe 4 or 5? Well, there's a lot of work when you're putting on these base coats to clean the equipment. So really 4 lures, 5 lures, 6 lures, it's no more work to do that. Now, there's more work in sanding and doing all of the other things. But anyway, that's what I'm going to do. The next time you see me, I should be in my shop, and I'm going to be measuring these guys up and deciding on the wood that I'm going to use, and then probably these will definitely have to go through the planer because I want to split them again like I have in my previous videos. And what I mean by splitting is they're made of 2 pieces lightly glued together, and then I shape them, and I take them apart, and then I add lead inside. I have a little pour hole. This one has a pour hole. You can't see it there. They're absolutely invisible. Even I don't know where they are anymore. So, but out of those 4 or 5, I'm going to make a variety of weights. One certainly a floater, hopefully maybe 1 a slow sinker, and then maybe 2 of about this size here, which are fast sinkers. So the first thing we do is we take a picture of our lure, and as I've shown you previously, you bring that into Word, and you put it on a grid that you've made, 1-inch grid. So you can copy the contours of your target lure. This really works great if you have a lure that is the best lure and you want to make a bunch more, or you take a picture of it and you can just bring it in here, and all of a sudden you want to make it a 7 foot. You just grab the corners and move it out to 7 foot or 8 foot or 9 foot, do whatever you want. So using Word is really a valuable tool. Now, also you'll see one of the things I've done is I put a red line in there. That's the stainless steel through wire, where that's going to go, and that's going to fit on the inside of the wood in 2 little channels that I make in the wood, and I'll show you that in just a little while. So once you've got this, you make this. You just simply cut it out. Now, one thing I wanted to show you is this is the time to make changes if you want to make changes. Notice this funny colored little patch right along the top. I decided I wanted a head slightly bigger than the original, so it wouldn't be quite as tapered. So I added that, so that's going to be part of my my new template. It'll have a bigger head. Changes are just that easy. So after you've got these 2 guys, you simply put them onto thicker cardboard, copy them over, and you've got an absolutely faithful template of your original. Now, previously, years ago, I used to go on the internet and take pictures of hooks that I liked that were for sale. One of the unfortunate parts, it doesn't give you the width information. So you can see that's why these guys maybe are so wide, because I was kind of guessing on that. Nowadays, what I do, if there is a truly spectacular lure that I really like, I'll order one, and then I'll copy it, and then I have not only the profile information but the width information as well. Okay, I'm back in my shop. I've measured with my vernier that this lure is 0.9 of an inch. This is probably the widest part here. I may move that up a little bit. And as I said, I'm going to make 4 of these, but I decided I'm also going to make 2 of these larger ones. Now, in hindsight, I think these are a little bit too wide across the back. So I measured them at 1.5 of an inch. So I've decided that I'm going to actually make them 1.2 inches. So I'm going to get back when I've got, I use wood from Home Depot. I use Select Pine. I think pine is an ideal wood. It's fairly inexpensive, readily available. It's much harder than spruce, believe it or not. And I've tried many other woods like basswood, which is a bit soft, and cedar, which is really soft. I've zeroed in on pine as being a pretty darn good wood. So I'm going to be cutting out some rough lures here, and I'll get back to you at the next step. I've just taken a couple pieces through the thickness planer, and together they're 0.9 of an inch, which is exactly the target that I was looking for. Now I also, I hope you can see these grooves that I put in. And what I make sure to do with this groove is I cut it one way and then I turn it around and I cut it again. That makes this notch absolutely central. So I can put any two pieces together and they'll line up. So what I'm going to do is, when I'm ready, I'll be gluing these pieces together. But before I do that, I get to use my template that I just made. Okay, here I am using the template to scribe onto the wood. Pretty easy once you've got a template that's thick enough. Just that easy. I'm keeping the two pieces together right now with a little pin nail. So there's 4 pin nails for each, and then I'm going to cut them out, and that way the top and the bottom stay together, so when I go to the bandsaw I can cut them out and they'll be identical. So this particular piece has 3 on it, just because that was the wood in my scrap pile. So I'll do the same for the larger lure. Same process. So here are all the 6 1/4 inch lures. They've been cut on the bandsaw. See, nothing's glued. In fact, that's the next step for these guys. Bear in mind, I'm also working in parallel on the bigger guy. It's exactly the same, just slightly bigger. All right, we're ready to clean up these edges. A little bit rough from the bandsaw. And I've got this rest set at 90 degrees. Away we go. Okay, so we're back, and I've sanded down all of these edges, and this is also the time to make sure you drill any holes that you need to drill, because the wood is still fairly square to itself. Once you start grinding on the belt sander, nothing is square anymore. So one of the very, very important things to do is locate the eye, and I do that, of course, from the original paper template, and I put it onto the thicker cardboard template, and then I just kind of poke a nail through it and I drill a hole, and it goes all the way through. So while you're doing all of the grinding, those holes will always align and give you a proper alignment of the eyes. The eyes are very difficult to get level and straight, and this makes sure that you know where the eyes go. So I drill the lead hole, and I drill the belly loop. Now I've done that for the larger ones, larger stick baits. There's the belly loop, and there's the lead hole. Now these bigger ones I've also drilled out with this great big long drill, and it goes in very easy. And you remember that channel that I left in the wood? I cut it specifically, and what happens is this drill follows it perfectly, and you can actually drill all the way to the front. See how that comes out? That's just beautiful. Never do you have a hole that's not centered. Okay, so then what I do is I've taken my template and I've marked where the shoulder should be. So on all of my lures, small and large, I have made a line across here. That's the widest part of the lure. So when you're grinding the lure, you can tell, because you'll have a flat spot here, which is great because that tells you that that shoulder is going to be highest here. And then what I also do is I measure the nose of the lure and the tail of the lure, which are about the same actually. So then what I do is I take this guy here and I mark where the nose should be. So now I've got the shoulder and I draw a line, and that's going to help me grind that and keep the hook symmetric. Now also on the tail I do that as well, and I go from that shoulder point down to where the tail should go. So that gives me some good guidance. Now on the bottom I like to put about a half an inch parallel lines. You always mark the center, that's the most important line because that's what you're going to grind to, but these outside lines will give you a guide. So I've done that for both the small lures and the large lure as well. So there's that bottom one, it's all. And I just take the measurements right off the lure for the nose. Now this nose I wanted to make smaller, so I did. This tail I wanted to make a whole lot smaller, so I did. So I'm in good shape for the Rev 2 version of this hook here, because remember I wanted it not near as thick. So now I am actually ready to go on to the table belt sander and start to grind, and that's where you'll see me next. So we're getting ready to start doing the sanding on the belt sander, table belt sander. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grind this front down to these lines, and then I'm going to grind the sides to the lines, and then I'm going to grind some of this stuff down. So I'm going to show you a little bit of grinding, and then after that I'm just going to show you the different steps where I end up. I've got a dust collection system that's going to help me. There's a fair bit of dust comes off these things. So okay, let's get going. Okay, you can see how I've taken it right down to the line here. Same as on the bottom. Same on the back. And now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start working on this tail. I'm going to make that round. And then I'm going to go back towards the high point. So, let's get going. Okay, you can see how the lure is starting to get nice taper here. Now this is flat right now, and we're going to start sanding it over, and there's a lot of that. And of course we want the high point to be right along here and all the way down to the nose, so we've got a fair bit of work to do in the belly as well. So I'll get back to you with some when I'm a little bit farther ahead. So it's starting to take shape now, and you can feel a few flat spots on here, which is not a bad thing. As you get closer to finishing the lure, you're gonna soften those flat spots. And of course, here's the widest part right here. So you're aiming for that flat spot to be kind of right there, just a little flat spot. And then, so I still have to taper these two ends a little bit. Notice the nose is starting to look pretty good. And of course, the whole bottom has to be thinned. Right now it's still pretty chunky, so we'll keep going. So this lure is pretty much ready to do some hand sanding on. And you see how I've narrowed it down here, and it gets wider and wider, and then as it goes over the back it becomes narrower again. So the face is looking pretty good. One of the things you have to concern yourself is that you have to use a Forstner bit. So right around the eyes it actually has to be fairly flat, otherwise the Forstner bit doesn't dig properly. And so both sides have to be a little bit flat around the Forstner bit. So I'm going to do some sanding with some 80 grit, and I'll show you some results. One of the ways that you can tell if you're doing well is you run your fingers like this down it, and you'd be surprised how easy it is to feel bumps and lumps and maybe areas on one side that's thicker than the other. So, alright, I'll get back. Notice you try and keep the center lines on, because that's really your last guides. The other marks have all been taken off, except the center lines, maybe a little bit here. So you try and keep them on as much as you can, but as you can see I've sanded through some of them. So this lure has now had some 80 grit sandpaper used on it, and I've actually gone up to 100 as well. And now it's time to drill out the eye sockets. So a trick I've learned from one of the internet lure makers is you take a little bit of super glue and you put a little bit around the eyes and let it dry. And what that does is, when you're using a Forstner bit, it reduces the amount of tear out around the hole. It doesn't totally eliminate it. I haven't been able to find Forstner bits that are carbide, so all I can get is high-speed steel. So this helps a fair bit, and we'll talk about installing eyes at a later time, but it's an interesting process. If you do it right, they look great. If you don't do it right, well, they don't look as great. So here's what the sockets look like. On these smaller lures, it's very, very easy to go a little bit deep. The Forstner bit sometimes will kind of grab a little bit. So I've noticed that this eye is too deep. And what that causes is the eye is now probably dead even with the sides where you want it to be slightly bulging. And let me show you on the other side here, probably a little bit better. So you can kind of see that eye can bulge a little bit. So one of the things that you can do if the eye is not quite right, which is quite often, quite honestly, I use a LePage's wood filler, and rather than use crazy glue to glue it in, I put in some wood filler. I put the eye on top of that, and I kind of rock the eye around until it's lined up just perfect, and they should actually be bulging a little bit. And even this one here, you can see this one is flat, so it should be out a little bit, and this one's actually concave, so this one is in too far. But this is just some of the finery when you're doing the eyes can take a lot of effort.